Hey, Joey.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Sam.
How are y'all?
Doing
Good.
well. Doing well. Thank you.
Hey, Joyce.
Okay, Sam, I did send you that email earlier that you're leading the meeting tonight, didn't I?
I'm good at facilitating. What do y'all think about this? That's about all I have to do.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, speaking of facilitating, Lydia is up in the mountains of Virginia at her grandmother's funeral. And so she will not be joining us tonight. So I actually am facilitating. So I'm going to need everybody's help. And I think we've got a couple of folks that said that they couldn't come as well. So if anybody joins us, and one thing, this meeting is scheduled to run from 7 until 8. But if we're done at 20 after 7, it's fine with everybody. So we're just going to talk until we run out of stuff to talk about.
And the chapter's fairly short. So, I mean, it has some good meat, but it's, if we talk much more than that, we're going to lose interest. So.
Absolutely. One thing I will ask, Sam, if you don't mind, if you'll start us off with a quick word of prayer, then we can get into the conversation. You mind?
Sure.
Hey, thanks.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for this privilege we have to join together. Thank you for this author who put together the information and let us talk through things. And please help us have a good discussion and grow closer to you because of such. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I think that, we are recording this meeting, and then I'm going to send it to the church, and it's going to get edited to perhaps become a podcast for people who want to learn more about evangelism. So with that being said, I think it would be a great idea.
Freeze? Did for me.
Yeah, he froze.
I did.
This is one way to get us to facilitate among the three of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then say, what was something? Well, somebody. Oh, now it says Tracy is the host. It says it's recording now. Did somebody hit record?
There's Oe.
You see him? I don't see him yet. There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, that's me. Did you miss me?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And we discussed the chapter. We're good.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And we'll be seeing y'all later on. Yeah.
We'll close in prayer.
Please.
Amen.
What I was going to say before we lost internet at our house and I had to reboot, so sorry about that, was that since this is being recorded, I think it would be a great idea for everyone to go around and introduce themselves and let everybody on the recording know how long you've been a member of Trinity. And we are the Evangelism Committee at Trinity Baptist Church in Raleigh. My name is Oe Osterkamp, and my wife's name is Becky. We have a 13-year-old named Oren, and we actually joined, and you guys are going to have to help me out with this date. We actually joined Trinity the second Sunday we met in the Rock when the sanctuary was being redone.
Oh.
And we couldn't figure out what date that was. I don't know if that's on top of anybody's mind or not. We think it's like 5 or 6 years ago. Does that sound about right?
I don't think it was that long ago, but I never know.
I would say 4 years.
Yeah.
I was chair of the deacons that year, but I don't remember.
Because we went for a long time before we joined, and that's why the date itself is a little fuzzy. But we do remember that Oren went to 3rd grade Sunday school and all of that. And now he's in 7th grade. So we know it's been at least 4 years anyway. So that's us. Joyce, how about you?
Well, I have been a member of Trinity since Joyce Lindsay, and I've been a member of Trinity since 2004. I mean 1984.
Wow.
Yes, 1984. It's a great church. I'm happy there.
Sam?
I'm Sam Spellman. We joined in 98, and then we moved to Florida between 2002 and 2008 and came back. So that's about 23 years, but with a 6-year hiatus where we in Florida. My wife is Karen, and we have a 17-year-old daughter, Rosemary. So.
Okay. Joe?
Well, my name's Joe Mitchener, and Libby is my wife, and we've been members, I think, since about 2016, somewhere there. We visited for a couple of years before and then joined. And then I have grown twins and grandkids, and we had a ton of friends at Trinity even before we joined. So it was an easy transition from us from our prior church to join Trinity.
Great. And last but the greatest, Ms. Burgess.
Elizabeth Burgess. I go by Liz as well. And I have been part of Trinity. I'm going to round it to 15 years. I was away for a while also. I lived in Idaho for a couple of years, came back. And I also have twins, Joe. My girls are grown. They're 43 years old, something like that. I have to think about it. Anyway, fraternal twins. One lives in North Carolina, one up in Jersey. And I have a son who lives in New York City.
Wow.
Oh, very good.
Very cool. Well, I
And
will give it.
grandkids or grandsons.
Oh, very good. How old are your grandsons?
They are spread. So the twins have the boys, but this is funny. The one twin married right out of college and had her family, and the other waited 12 years before she got married and finally had her boys at age 41. Yeah, I know. That's a disaster, but she's done it. So her boys are just turned 2 and 4, and the other grandsons are 14 and 16.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Well,
we were around that age when we had Rosemary. So
yeah, we actually had Oren when I was 48 and Becky was 41. And
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah,
those
Wow.
are the miracles.
yeah, no doubt. There's no doubt.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
a brief summary of what led us here tonight. We were talking in our previous meeting about evangelism, and we discussed a sermon by Tim Keller, and we had a great conversation around it. And a couple of the quotes that really helped our conversation going, here's one of them. Evangelism is Christians talking about their faith with others and then inviting them to embrace the faith for themselves. But I think the clincher that really got Joe's gears going was when Keller said, there are as many ways to share the good news to people as there are people. Evangelism is simply loving people around you and being involved in relationships, and at the same time, being courageously transparent about what Jesus means to you. And then Joe goes, "Oh, I've got an idea. I got an idea." And he had this idea about this book, Evangelism for the Rest of Us. And we started talking, and then one thing led to another. Lydia bought a copy of the book for each of us, and we're going to spend the next several meetings discussing this book one chapter at a time. And Evangelism for the Rest of Us is, the subtitle is Sharing Christ Within Your Personality Style. And then there's a big red panic button there because he's an introvert. And the author's name is Dr. Mike Bechtel. And I watched an interview with him, and he had this hilarious quote I wanted to give you. He said that that most extroverts think that introverts just need to be healed. If they can learn to be a little noisier, their lives would be a whole lot better. And that's what kind of motivated him to do some introspection and to actually write this book for the rest of us who perhaps aren't as outgoing as others. And I think I'm really excited about it. And I have to admit, I did read further than the first chapter, but I think we really, really are going to enjoy this book. So to start with, what popped out, and this chapter 1 was basically an introductory chapter that kind of gave a little background about what led him to write this book. Did anything jump out to you that you think would be great to talk about?
Well, I'll start. First off, I appreciated his transparency and his honesty that evangelism, like he was, like probably all of us were told, this is what you do. You go out and, beat the streets and talk to anybody that's sitting alone. And he had a quote in there. It says, "I felt like it was a noble effort, but I hated it."
Right.
And that's where I am. So by reading it, I felt less guilty. So I thought it was a nice way to tee up that this doesn't always work the way, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's not the style for most of us.
Right. It's a good point.
I agree. It's not my style. That's why I said I could really identify with him. Not being able to go door to door and being really uptight about trying to do that. I don't think I could do it that way either.
Yeah. When he was talking about going to an evangelism conference and being sent out 2 by 2, and then finding the guy taking a break at McDonald's, and then they come up from behind him, and he immediately jumps in so he can go ahead and check his box. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of a youth mission trip I went on when I was 14, and we had the same assignment. This was down in Florida, and I remember going up to this apartment scared to death, and this 25-ish or something gentleman opened the door, and there were a bunch of other young people in there, and I smelled the smell that I've never smelled before, but it smelled really good, and they were having a really good time in there. Mm-hmm. And me and my friend told them what we were doing, and there was just belly laughs from everybody, and we just looked at each other and said, "Okay, we can just check." We just left, but I just remember that it's kind of like, you just never know what kind of response you're going to get. Yeah. Liz, what did you think of the first chapter?
Well, I'm probably the oddball in the group because I'm called into evangelism. I enjoy it. And by the way, this may shock you, I would classify myself as an introvert. So that upsets the whole chapter. But I will say this, I firmly believe that evangelism is about relationship. And when I was in college, I went to Wheaton College, Christian college, and I wanted to do something more than just be rubbing shoulders with Christians. So I attended Campus Crusade, and sure enough, they sent us out to a neighboring campus, secular campus in twos. Well, actually, I ended up by myself. Anyway, it was cold calls. Well, I had been in sales before. I love to sell too. I just as fun. So I was looking at it a bit like a sales call. However, when I got back to report, I found that it felt superficial, that what I had done felt superficial, because how can I develop a relationship with a kid I've never met before, and then jump into sharing about my experience with Christ? It just did not feel very real. And I felt like a fake doing it that way. And so I never did cold calling again. I don't like that mode of operation. And I'll share other things that I have done over the years as we go through the chapters.
Very good. How about you, Jeff?
I was struck by one of the forwards, one of the people who endorsed the book, that made a statement: the evangelism fear factor fades when we simply love people and talk to them, making room for natural relationships with the people in your everyday world. That's one of the problems I have, being an attorney and having to just have pressures of, responding to clients and carrying the workload and making room. Right. Making room. That was the key, making room for relationships when the conversations can bubble up very naturally. And if you just love the people and open the conversations, and you just have to keep your antenna up for opportunities. But what struck me about chapter 1, which I really liked, Mike Bechtel writes in a very entertaining way. Anecdotally, by talking about himself, he identifies the very root of the problem for many of us, and then tees up a very refreshing, guilt-free solution without claiming to be the only way to evangelism. And that's what I liked as well. He made it a point that he was not being critical of street and tract evangelism. He was not being critical of door-to-door knocking. He was not being critical of walking into hamburger joints and sitting down with somebody next to him. He was just saying that there is a different way that may be more of a natural fit. And that's what I really appreciated, was his candor about that. I've done street evangelism, and boy, it's like wearing two left shoes. But I also know people who have responded from a street evangelist. And, you know, you never know. You can't pre-diagnose what style is going to suit someone unless you know that person.
And Joe, you're right. He was very open to the fact that different styles, different approaches, and multiple approaches to get there. I'm trying to, it won't work for everyone. The same approach won't work for everyone. And he talks about that.
You know, I think you both have a great point, because a lot of books that I read, whether it's about leadership or evangelism or just about anything, the author tends to establish themselves as you know what, I have looked at all the ways this has been done before, and they're all wrong. I have discovered the right way, and I'm going to spend the rest of my book telling you why it's the right way. And his approach, by saying, you know what, this is just one other approach to consider, I thought it was refreshing as well. That's really a great point. And he says in trying to figure out for himself his big barriers, on page 16, he says, the nagging questions continued. If God wanted me to evangelize, why was it so hard? Why was it so foreign to my introvert personality? I felt like it wasn't fair. God made some people noisier than others, and it seemed easy for them. But I wasn't noisy, and I felt inferior, even displeasing to God. And in reading that, and his being vulnerable enough to let me know how he felt, made me respect and admire him even more, because most people at that point would have completely just shut down. But he didn't do that. He kept discovering. And I think that is something in and of itself that we can all take to heart and learn from, don't you?
Yep. Tied to this, and Liz talked about it coming from your heart. I think he talks about when he was checking the boxes, if you will, he wasn't feeling it. He was just going through, glad I accomplished that, and this kind of thing wasn't coming from the heart. In fact, he used a quote. They called it, he felt like a sanctified telemarketer.
Yeah,
and
right.
I thought that was, I could sort of see it. You know, check, I made the call, now we hang up. And yeah, if I call 100 people, there may be somebody that responds. But it's what's the style that works for you, and I'm sure we'll get into it more in future chapters. What works, but make sure it's from the heart. And I thought that was tied into what Liz said.
You know, when you study Jesus, you know, when we read about him in what he says in his style, there were times when he was sitting in a boat talking to masses. I mean, it was like a Billy Graham type thing, you know, mass communication. And then there were times when he had his 12 disciples, or when, you know, he also had other disciples, but we know the 12 closest, but he'd be talking to a group of maybe 12, 15, 20, or 30. And then there are these wonderfully beautiful moments when he's one-on-one with somebody. And he had different approaches in each of those different scenarios. He had a different approach, but he wasn't preachy. He never crammed it down their throat, except for the Pharisees, and that's because they deserved it. Which is another thing too, is style. You know, you have to consider who it is you're talking to. You know, and be sensitive to someone on one end of the spiritual spectrum as opposed to someone who is on a far other end of the spiritual spectrum. And that is going to dictate how you talk to them. But still, I think the key is getting from the heart and speaking from love. The older I get, the word love just is a cure-all. I mean, it cures a lot of ailments. Love.
I have a saying, in the end, love always wins.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I was actually at a dinner party, and we were out on the deck, and I was talking to a gentleman, and something came up about church or something, and he said, he looked at me. He's kind of person that likes to provoke anyway, and he said, I believe that anybody who believes in God has a lazy intellect.
Wow.
And I use something that I teach in my leadership classes at Duke, and there are three-word terms that help me control, because I can get really passionate pretty quickly, and sometimes that's not really the best approach. But what keeps me grounded is this three-word continuum. And the first thing I said was, tell me more. And so he looked at me because he expected me to go nose to nose with him. But I turned it and I said, tell me more. Tell me why you believe that the way you do. So he fumbled around because I don't think anybody had ever asked him to talk about where he comes from. And then I said something that really, I think, made him stop and think. And I said, you know what, maybe you're right. And he was like, what? Because he wanted to fight and I wasn't going to give it to him. I said, maybe you're right. I said, but for me, all I can tell you is my faith in God has helped me through unbelievably dark times and has provided me comfort on the darkest days of my life. And I hold very close to that. So let me ask you, what gives you comfort in those times? Because we all have it. And he didn't have an answer. And it was just one of those things where I think in an effort to want to provoke, he really hadn't thought through the theological, it's more of, it can't be proven, so therefore it can't be true kind of thing, as opposed to the more faith, what we really hold dear in our hearts, that God is always with us no matter where we go and what we do. And we had a wonderful conversation. And at the end of it, we left as friends. And I don't know what he did afterwards, but I certainly know he didn't think less of God at the end. And so I felt that it was, at that point, it was what I felt led to share, and hopefully it was what he needed to hear.
Oh, wait, you mentioned there was I think you said three-word statements, and I got, tell me more, maybe you're right. What was the third one, do you remember? That's okay.
I'll think of it and I'll tell you.
Okay, thank you.
You touched on something that is so key, and that is oftentimes the best thing we can do is ask a question. When we ask a question that someone has to answer, they own that answer. It's their answer. We could give them that answer, but then it makes it sound like we're preaching and it's our answer. And even if they believe it, they could defensively reject it. But ask those sensitive questions. A question I like is what, kind of like you said, what makes, what is it? Why is it? What is it that what's your resource? What's your,
right. In fact,
how did you grow up? What were you taught?
Right. You saying
where
the
does
word
this
question,
come from?
You saying the word question reminded me, and The one I couldn't remember was the first one. And when he said, I believe that anybody who believes in God has a lazy intellect, my first question was, tell me more. And then the second one, as he was saying, I said, help me understand. Because he told me, and I'm like, help me understand why you feel that way. So that was the second one. And then the third one was, maybe you're right. And then so those were the three. So thanks, Joe, for stoking that.
Thank you.
The last quote that that really jumped out at me was on page 18 and the top of 19. And he said, if God wanted me to witness in a certain way, why wouldn't he have given me what I needed to do it? My conclusion, I was disobedient and just needed to try harder, or rely on his strength more, or pray more, or something. Whatever it was, I wasn't doing it and really didn't know how. Then one day, a tiny seed of an idea planted itself in my mind and never left. It lay dormant for a while, though I always knew it was there. Over time, it took root and began to grow. The seed was a simple thought. What if the problem isn't obedience? What if the things I've always been taught about evangelism aren't the full picture? What if there's more to it than what I've been told? What if God has a variety of ways we can share our faith, ways that are different from the traditional methods that we've been taught? And that's where his journey began. And that summarizes all of the points that you guys have made so far tonight. And I think that what he does here is, the book is an easy read, and it's not very long, but it's incredibly thought provoking. And you may read 5 pages, but you're not done because your mind continues with his thought and how it applies to you. At least that's the way it happened to me. Did it happen the same way with you when you were reading it?
It made me think about other things. It made me think how it related to examples that have happened in my life where his stories, as you say, it's a good way he tells the story. It made me think of others and how you internalize it. It made me excited about reading chapter 2, 3, and beyond.
Yeah.
So.
Did it make you think, and I know, Liz, this is what you do, so it may not apply to you as much as the rest of us. Did it make you think of times, like it made me think of my story? Did it make you think of times where you may have been evangelizing but just didn't know it? Like when you were having a conversation with somebody, not for the purpose of evangelizing, but for the purpose of loving that person and sharing the love that God gives us with them. And perhaps that was evangelism in its finest form. Did you think of an experience like that? Or is it just me?
Well, I'm not sure I'm good at evangelizing at all, but my approach is more just to invite people to church, to tell them about Trinity and how wonderful it is and how much I love being there, and especially if it's an unchurched person, to just invite them to come. And that kind of leads into maybe sharing what the Lord and my relationship means to me, what he means to me. It's just so hard for me to sit down and just simply lay out the plan of salvation. And one other thing I thought about as I read this chapter was, and I read ahead a little bit too, and I found this very interesting. Most of my friends are Christians. I don't find myself with a lot of people who aren't Christians. And that's something he talks about in this book. Just have a conversation with someone, even if you don't talk about Christ, just have a conversation with someone who is not a Christian. And I thought about my circle of friends, the people that I interact with and talk with all the time, they are Christians. And so I'm challenging myself just to have conversations, because it's like Liz says, it's about relationships. And I don't have enough relationships with people who aren't Christians. I have some, and I had a chance to have lunch with one of those people a couple of weeks ago, and I did share something with her. I don't know if it made any impression or not, but I shared something regarding the Lord with her. But I don't have a lot of people like that in my daily life. So I'm challenging myself to have more conversations with people who do not know the Lord, who are non-Christians.
Well, I think you have more impact than you give yourself credit for, Joyce. I believe I may have even told this story at a previous meeting, and I apologize for retelling it. I know I told it in my Sunday school class. So when I got baptized when I was around 12 years old, shortly thereafter, my daddy and I were out in the potato field digging potatoes, and I asked him. I said, "Well, since I've been baptized, do I need to be a missionary or a preacher?"
Mhm.
And he put his pitchfork in the ground and came over and put his arm around me. And he said, "Son," he said, "every morning when you get up and your feet hit the floor, that's when your sermon starts.
Mm.
We're all preachers. Your life is your sermon. And wherever your feet take you, that is your mission field."
Mhm.
And that's always stuck with me.
That makes me think of even, the doctors, part of their oath or part of their theology, whatever you call it, is do no harm.
Mhm.
I think when we do, the way we carry ourselves as Christians, we need to speak and act in a way that does no harm to Christianity,
Mhm.
and be aware of that.
Mhm.
It's sometimes, it's easier if someone does not know you're a Christian, you feel like you have more license just to do whatever you want to do. But when they know you're a Christian, there's a certain expectation and they're looking at you a lot closer. And sometimes in fact, I've had some Jewish friends tell me that they almost expect me to talk about Jesus. And when I don't, they're surprised. They think I'm supposed to. So that's kind of, he talks about not being guilty, but
Right.
That kind of puts me on a little bit of guilt trip when somebody says, "Well, why didn't you talk about Jesus?" or something. It makes me wonder if there's a line in here that when he confesses that, he was just checking boxes and stuff, he says, "But I really didn't care about the people I was witnessing to."
Right.
And that stopped, and I'm thinking, how much do I really care about this person I'm speaking to? And if I call them a friend, why am I not saying something or trying to have a relationship that might keep them out of hell? I mean, that sounds very Baptist, but we do need to care about people, love people.
I think to your Jewish friends though, Joe, is the saying, I forget who says this, but they would rather see a sermon than hear one any day. And if somebody says, I expect you to say about Jesus, then you can just say, "Well, walk around with me for a day and you'll see him all day long." You don't have to, it doesn't have to come from your mouth. It comes from who you are. And I think you're talking about Jesus all the time, Jeff.
One
Oh,
thing,
yeah, I've enjoyed the discussion. I hate to do it. I'm going to have to drop, but thank you
Okay.
for the discussion.
Thank you, Sam. Take care. We'll see you.
Bye, Sam.
along with what we were just saying, one thing he said on page 17 is, though it is important to live a holy life in front of our neighbors, it didn't count much. It didn't count as much as talking out loud to them about Christ. So, we always talk about just living that example, and I try to do that, but I don't talk enough. And that was something I underlined in this book.
George, that I've heard this said before. There's a lot of people who live decent, honest lives, and they're good community volunteers, but they're not believers.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the Hindu faith, it could be the Jewish faith, it could be no faith at all, but they are just nice, polite, honest people. So if we don't put some sort of words to it, we're no different. they don't know the difference between us and somebody else.
Right. I think that's where I lean on my three word phrases, because
Yeah.
if you want, if you want to be able to use those words, sometimes you have to listen to their words first.
Yes. Yes.
Otherwise, you're just preaching at them. But and the defenses come up. But if you're having a conversation, then and you can talk about how Jesus has changed your life, and how it's just like, one of my favorite lines in my favorite series. It's like, I was one way and now I'm completely different. And the thing in between was him. And to be able just to talk about it when somebody feels like they owe it to listen after you have listened to them is different than trying to bang them over the head. And
Yeah.
that's just for me, from a comfort level standpoint.
Well, there's an age old, I forget who coined this to start with, but people don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, Liz, when you're out there, you encounter all kinds of different places where people are in their faith or without their faith.
Very much so.
Are there anything that you use it's kind of like your touchstone, that you have found is a comfortable way for you to begin the conversation?
Well, I want to back up. One of you brought up about, you did, about the question, ask a question, throw a question back. And I modeled that a great deal. Recently, a man was able to talk. He did not come in, completely knocked out. He was able to talk with me, and he was very, very concerned about his salvation. So I went to the room, and he asked, his question was, am I going to heaven? Well, that's great to hear. And I turned it around. I said, well, what do you think? So he went down the road of doing good things in life. Oh, okay. And I just said, would you be interested in knowing what the Bible has to say about this? Okay. And then I just opened it up and started reading to him. And I wasn't telling him. I said, why don't you interpret this for me? For by grace you're saved through faith. It's not of yourself. It's not of works. And so I asked him to just dissect it and tell me what he thought. And by the time we were finished, I felt confident that he now knew how to accept the Lord as his Savior. And one thing, too, I find it's such a personal thing. And people are proud, and especially around his wife. He was used to being the tough guy of the family and provider. So another thing I will do is ask the family to dismiss themselves from the room. In my hospital work, I do remember, in fact, it was a Baptist couple that came to me. My brother's not saved. I know it. You've got to talk to him. I said, well, I will do that under one condition, that you don't go to the room with me, that it's solo. And there's where the element of my being a stranger is a huge plus. He has nothing to lose. I just thrown it all out there, right? And if he accepts the message too, he doesn't feel less than compared to maybe his sister, who's been this 5-star Christian all of her life. The other thing I wanted to flip back to Joyce about inviting. I really think is a strong thing. I think of Andrew in the Bible, one of the disciples. I love Andrew because that was his role. He was always inviting people to Jesus. And he wasn't the preacher out there. We don't have the gospel according to Andrew. But he said, let me go get my brother. I think he's interested. He gets Peter and he gets John, and he gets people to sign up into this stuff that Jesus was talking about. So that's fantastic to invite someone. And that's I think a stepping stone in building our courage and confidence. And it's also a it's laying groundwork for conversation. So I will give an example. A lady in my neighborhood, she knew what I did for a living, and she knew I was a Christian, and she was diagnosed with cancer. Well, ring, ring, ring. Suddenly she needed me. And so I had not been pressing with her anything about becoming a Christian. I had just been living my life, and I had to forgive her son for something. And they were both amazed, at my grace in the matter. And I thought to myself, well, that's just was the right thing to do as a Christian. And so I was building a relationship and trust at the same time. So when she called, that's not the time I'm going to give her the plan of salvation. Oh, if you come to Jesus, everything's going to be all right. No. So, but I said, would you like for me to pray with you? Oh, yes. So then comes Easter Sunday. She's Catholic. And Easter, not practicing, Easter Sunday, I said, would you be interested in going to church? And I took her to Trinity. She loved the message. How do I know? Afterward, I said, would you like to get coffee? We went to Dunkin' Donuts right up the street, sat in the car, and she started talking, relationship. And what in the world, but she actually quoted a couple of things Jeff had said in the message. So she turned around and gave me material to build on. And then from there, I said, okay, this is a great little devotional. Would you like to do it? And it's like she's going to school. Liz, I'm reading this and I love it. She's reading this devotional. Now, I have not gotten to that point yet, but it's building where I get that opportunity to say, hey, would you like to know Jesus the way I know him? It's a building, it's a process. So not always does it happen, boom, boom, boom. Sometimes, when life is on the line, I don't waste time. But
Right. Well, I feel like we would be remiss if if I didn't jump on what you said, talk about how easy it is to invite people to a church like ours.
Mhm.
I have been to many, many different kind of churches that have had very, very powerful services. But if you didn't fit the box, it
Mhm.
was very obvious early on.
Mhm.
Jeff and the other ministers and the congregation and the church body itself at Trinity is the most welcoming, non-judgmental body and culture that I have ever experienced. And
Mhm.
it is so easy to invite someone to Trinity because you know that they are not going to leave feeling judged. They're going to leave feeling loved.
And he has beautifully introduced some what I call high church touches, such as the acolytes coming in with their little white robes
All
and
right.
lighting a candle. The first time I went to Trinity, I thought, "What? I'm at a Baptist church. What is this?" And she loved it. Oh, and I knew she was eating it up. Whoa!
Yeah.
Look at this. What's going on here in this Baptist church?
This is good.
Wonderful church. It's a wonderful church.
Well, I'm looking forward to chapter 2. Are we?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it is 7:45. Does anybody have anything final they would like to say about chapter 1 before we close for the night and head to the next meeting?
Not chapter 1, but I'm just going to say I'm teaching the Sunday school lesson Sunday, and I'm using something out of this book because it goes along so perfectly with our Sunday school lesson.
Oh, good. Good for you. Yeah, I felt like it was a victory for me just to learn how to pronounce Mike Bechtel because I had actually had to look it up on YouTube because there's so many ways it could be pronounced. But with a name like Owie Osterkamp, I'm very particular about how people pronounce their names.
Oh, man.
Anybody else? All right, let me close this in prayer real quick and then we can go. All right. God, you're so awesome. We thank you for making each one of us unique. And thank you for letting us know that that was by design. Every one of us is made the way you want us to be because you have something special for each one of us to do for you. And we thank you for giving us resources like this wonderful book to help us appreciate and embrace who we are and not compare ourselves to who we're not or to someone else. We thank you for these wonderful folks who meet on a regular basis to talk about ways we can convey your love to other people and help bring them in to the love that you offer to everyone. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all so
Beautiful,
much.
Owie.
Yep.
Good.
Take
Our
care.
next,
Yep,
our
you're
next meeting, Owie, is,
The next meeting is June the 3rd.
okay.
And you'll send an email, right,
I'll
before?
be sending, I'll be sending, I'm going to send you something with a video or something. I just can't help myself.
All right. Good night, all. This
All
is
right,
good.
thank you.
Thank you
Take
for
care.
participating.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. God bless.